Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the channel. I have a excellent interview for you guys today. Somebody I've been meaning to talk to for a while. A woman named Danean MacAndrews, who is a J6 misdemeanor defendant, somebody who's a former inmate at FCI Dublin, which, as many of you know, is a facility, a BOP facility that recently closed that we've been covering. So I'm very excited to bring her here today. I'm going to have her introduce herself and give a little bit of background about who she is and how she ended up at FCI Dublin.
Hi,
So go ahead. Tell us about
my
yourself.
My name's Danean MacAndrew. I am 56. I live in Southern California. I went to January 6th. I went into the building. I was later, almost 2 years later, I was arrested, and I was offered a plea deal, but I didn't accept the plea deal. I chose instead to go to a bench trial. So I had a bench trial last January of 2023. I was found guilty on all 4 nonviolent misdemeanors, and I was sentenced on August 8th of 2023 to 3 months in prison. And I was able to self-report. So turned myself in to FCI Dublin on October 17th of last year. And
Wow.
I ended up serving 78 out of 90 days.
Wow. What was that like, having to self-surrender to a federal prison for nonviolent misdemeanors?
It was a lot to process because I've never been in trouble before. I've never been arrested. I haven't even gotten a moving violation in over a decade, I think it's been. So it was a lot to process. I tried to prepare as best I could. I tried to get all the information I could about the facility before I went. I did my own research. I found out that the facility was known for SA of inmates. A lot at that time. Several of the guards and the chaplain and the former warden had been sentenced for inappropriate contact, I guess we could say, with inmates, and that made me pretty nervous. I talked to my attorney about it and was told that that happens at all female facilities, which was a horrifying response. I didn't really know what to expect. As I said, some of the research I was trying to do is get firsthand experiences from any female who had been in a female prison before. And I just was coming up empty. I found one lady who was sort of a fearmonger, and another like unhelpful interview. So I wanted to use my voice, hopefully, well, for many different reasons, but one of them is just to give ladies who are going to be sentenced to federal prison some idea of what it might be like, just because the fear of the unknown is probably the greatest fear when you're sentenced. Because if you're like me, you really have no idea what to expect, and it's not like I have friends who have been in prison and I could just ask them, like, that's not my crowd I hang with, So yeah, that was kind of rough. I called the prison before I went in, because the FCI Dublin, so Dublin is separated into 2 levels of security. There was a minimum security satellite camp. So that's typically your least egregious offenders are sentenced to the camp. They have much more freedom. And then there's a low security, it's just called FCI Dublin. So that's a higher security than the camp. So they have different mailing addresses. I wanted to be able to give friends and family my mailing address before I went in. So I called and the facility. And I said, could you tell me which side I'm going to be sentenced to? Is it in my record or whatever? And they said, no, but, tell me about your criminal history. I said, I don't have any. Well, was there violence in your offenses? I said, no, going in for misdemeanors. He's like, oh, yeah, you're going to the camp. Okay, great. So got that address, gave it to people, but I had heard that wasn't always the case, that just because you're told you're going to the camp doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to the camp. So, so I wasn't, and not to be specific to J6 defendants, but that's happened to several specific to J6 that they're in for misdemeanors, but they're not sent to a camp. They're sent to the higher security. I'm not really clear who makes that decision, if it's the judge, the BOP. I'm not really clear. And it, it's done, so I can't do anything about it. But so yeah, I was told I was going to the camp. And I also asked what the strip search was going to be like, because that was giving me anxiety. I'd never been strip searched. And I knew I would have to be. I'm going into federal prison. And so I asked the gentleman at the prison, and I asked, do they, touch you during it? And he said no. And he briefly described it, and that helped a lot, just to know I wasn't going to be touched during the strip search. I also asked him how I could stay out of trouble when I was in there. I asked him if he had any advice about that. And he said, if you feel in your gut like something is going sideways, get up and leave. Just get up and leave the situation. You don't want to be part of it, and you don't want to witness it, because you don't want to have to talk about it. You know? So
that's actually pretty good advice, I think.
Yeah, it was. He was a very nice man. He was very helpful and kind, and that helped some of my concerns, that I wasn't walking into a place where everyone would be cruel.
I'm kind of interested to hear about that too, because I know people have kind of a perception about prison guards and them being very callous and cold. What was your experience there? I'm sure it wasn't, all good or all bad. I'm sure there was a variety, but what was it like with the staff at the prison? What was your experiences overall?
It was definitely a variety. So just like in any profession, you're going to have people who are kind or cruel. You're going to have people who love their job and do it well, and those who hate their job and resent being at it. And it was very evident. So I would say several of the guards were personable. They would have a conversation with you. They wouldn't necessarily initiate a conversation, but there's a when you go out to the prison yard, to the recreation area, you have to show your ID to two guards who stand outside the recreation building. And there was a big willow tree to the right of where they stood, and that willow tree would be filled with black birds that have I think they're called red-shouldered blackbirds, and they would just be singing and singing, and it was such a nice noise. And so I would talk to the guards and say, do you know what kind of birds these are? And they're beautiful. And the guard said, yes, I love the birds. They bring a sense of tranquility. And I'm like, wow, this is amazing. I see the birds the same way the guard sees the birds. And so I did some research and asked around and found out what kind of birds they were, and then learned about the birds, and then went back the next week and told the guard, I found out what kind of birds they are, and these are the females, these are the males, and they eat these things, and they nest in these areas. And we just got to bond over the birds. It was very nice. He was a very kind man. There were several guards who I got along with quite well. I would say the majority of the guards, though, were not like that. There were, and the majority of the guards were male at
Really?
FCI Dublin. So yes, I would say it's just a rough estimate, maybe 60 to 70% were male, which I didn't expect. I didn't expect a bunch of male guards. Maybe I should have, because a man answered the phone when I called. But
Right.
yeah, so and it wasn't that the male guards were mean and the females were kind. It was not separated on, gender lines. So a lot of the guards, I'm very outgoing, and when I would be going to work in the morning, I would say hello to the guards who were out on the campus. They kind of oversee your movement when you move, and I would say hello, and several times the guards just wouldn't acknowledge me saying hello and wouldn't make eye contact. It was a very demoralizing experience to, even when I didn't try to initiate conversation or have a greeting with a guard, many of them would just look at me, but not look at me in the eye, not look at me as a human would look at a human, but more as a human would look at an animal. So you see just the whole shape of the animal. You don't look the animal necessarily in the eye. And it was demoralizing to not be seen. That was actually harder than I thought it was going to be. And I talked to several of the inmates in there, and I said, if there were one thing that you could change about prison, what would it be? And almost without variation, they said, I want to be seen. I want to be seen as a person, not as my crime.
That's so sad. I want to give you the chance to talk about some of the women that you met in there, and maybe change some people's perceptions about the kinds of people who are incarcerated. Because I know people hear, inmates, prison, and they automatically assume that if somebody's in there, number one, that they did something, and number two, it's that people kind of think that, well, they're there because they deserve to be there, they should be there. And I think that comes from a lack of understanding of what it actually is like inside these prisons. And also, it's sort of like, as a society, we haven't evaluated whether or not this is actually helping people or like rehabilitating them into society or not. I don't think it is. And I don't know what the solutions are to that. But I want you to talk about some of the women there, and their stories.
Yeah, just really quick, going back to the supposedly rehabilitative model that we have. If you are not even looking at a person in the eye like they are human, you are not doing anything to rehabilitate them. You are demoralizing them. You are making them feel less than human.
Right.
And
Yeah.
it's just extremely unhelpful. So when I went in there, I thought I've been guilty of this all of my adult life, that I just wrote off inmates just flippantly, without any thought. Just don't do the crime if you can't do the time, right? And of course, if they're in there, they committed some horrific crime, that I should be on the side of the victim. And how dare someone become a defense attorney and stand up for these people? That view of mine has also radically changed when I needed a defense attorney, and I'm a bit embarrassed by that it took me being thrown into this situation in order to actually spend time and give these serious issues more thought.
Right.
So I'm actually very grateful that I went to prison, because it's made me into a better person. It's made me more merciful, more understanding, more knowledgeable. um, about issues that very much matter to me now, that didn't matter to me before. So when I went in there, I had expected the inmates to racially self-segregate. So I
Yeah,
thought
that's
that,
sort of what you hear, or what you
yeah,
expect.
yeah, I mean, that's what I've seen on crime shows or whatever,
Yeah.
however the general public gets their information about what prison might be like. So yes, I thought it would be racially self-segregating, but that's not what I found at all, which was a huge relief to me because I didn't want to have to racially self-segregate.
Right.
That's not who I am. That's not how I feel about members of our society. And I was concerned about that. And thankfully, that's not what I found. The way things were self-segregating in there was typically based on the amount of time you were sentenced to, the amount of time you had yet to serve. And that was explained to me by an inmate in there. She said it's very hard to get close to the short timers because then they leave and it hurts. So
Oh,
the
that's so
people who are
sad.
there for a long time want to stay with the people who they're going to be friends with over, decades
Right.
in
That
many
does kind
cases.
of make sense from that
Mhm.
perspective. Yeah.
Absolutely. So I think it's harder for the short timers to build bonds with people. Thankfully, I was able to build bonds, very deep bonds with several of the inmates, um, who I just grew to adore. So a lot of people uh, think that if somebody is in federal prison, they must have been a child molester or a murderer or uh, some heinous act. I would say the majority of the women I met in there were there on drug crimes, or
Wow.
weapons crimes. Um, Many of them had come from foster care or broken
Oh,
families. I was listening to an interview a few days ago by a whistleblower. Her name is Tess Korth. She worked at FCI Dublin for 25 years. And I had heard before that 83% of female inmates have suffered uh, sexual or physical violence in their past. Uh,
wow.
Officer Korth said that it was 95% of the ladies in FCI Dublin who had
Wow.
experienced that. So, yeah, it was. I got to hear a lot of people's life stories. People would come to me to talk. Um, People have always done that to me my whole life. I, I guess I just, uh, you know, am a good ear or something. But the stories I heard in there would just, they were so bad. They were so bad. There were uh, victims of child trafficking.
Oh my
Um,
God.
and I got to hear a couple of those stories. Women who have been abused their whole lives, by family, by clergy. Uh, yeah, people. It doesn't seem an accident that it's 95% of the women in there have experienced these things.
Right.
Um, and not to be too self-revealing, but I have too. So that, I believe, gave me a bond and a heart for these ladies. So yeah, uh, so one of the reasons I'm speaking out, so I told you that the ladies self-segregate based on the amount of time that they're in. Well, when you get in there, people, the ladies have people on the outside run the new people, and make sure that what they're saying they're in for is actually what they're in for. So they ran
Oh,
me, of course,
okay.
which,
So they have the ability to like kind of check up on you to figure out if you are like who you say you are.
yes, not
Yeah.
directly,
Okay.
but
That's
indirectly.
interesting.
So they can send
Right.
an email or make a call and have,
Okay.
somebody in their life on the outside look people up. So they looked me up, which of course I was fine with that. Um, so the ladies who were in there for a long time or for life, they asked me to come to their table and tell them my story. So I told them my story briefly of the day and how I ended up there. They were pretty amazed that I would turn down the plea deal when I knew I would be sentenced to prison. I think that earned me some respect with them. They didn't come out and say it, but it seemed that way. A lot of them, well, let me just try to stay on track here. So they asked me to their table. I told them my story. They said it was horrible. And I said, actually, what I think is horrible is that you ladies have been subjected to these crimes from these guards and the chaplain and the warden. I think that's what's horrible. And they said, whoa, 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 you know about that? What do you know? And I said, of course I know about that. I did research before I got here, and they're like, wait, they don't have a way to gauge in there what the general public knows about what they're going through in there. And so they were just so encouraged that somebody would come in and would already know what had been happening to them in there. And so I told them when I got out, I would try to speak for them and try to give them a bigger voice. And I told them, like, I don't have a big social media following, but I have a little bit, and what I have, I will try to use to amplify their muted voices. And so that's why I'm even speaking.
Wow. I know there's a number of issues with the facility itself. I mean, it's shut down now, but I want you to talk about some of the global issues that you experienced at the facility.
Okay, I'll try to be quite brief with these. One of the problems was the water. So they had it's an old facility. It used to be a military barracks, and so it's
Really? The
old.
prison? Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, the pipes are old. At the end of the a buddy of mine in there told me at the end of the COVID lockdowns, they had a lot of problems with the pipes, and they tried to fix them on their own, and then they had to hire an outside company to come in and fix the pipes. So the water was bad. I got really sick. My stomach got very sick after 2 days of being in there. It's probably TMI, but 55 out of 78 days I was in there, I had extremely bad diarrhea. It turned out that they were
That's
adding.
dangerous.
Yeah, it is dangerous, especially when that dehydrates you, but you can't drink
Yeah,
the water
and make you
that you
lose
need to
weight too.
hydrate.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, yeah. It was rough because when you don't feel well, you're mopey, you don't want to exercise, you don't have a positive mindset. I had to fight really hard mentally to stay positive in there especially when I didn't feel well, you know.
Right.
So it turned out they were adding something to the water that we were drinking. I wasn't the only one who had
What?
issues with the water. So
That's
one of my last
concerning.
days in there, well, a lieutenant had told me had said something about the water, and she said, "Well, isn't it good enough for you? We add the pellets." And I'm like, "You add
The
pellets?
pellets. Oh
Like
my
what?
God. Like the
What
last
pellets?
thing you want to hear when you hear
Right?
somebody talking
Like,
about
okay,
water,
the
we
water
added the pellets.
the
What
water's
pellets?
making me sick. What pellets?" So I asked
Oh,
around, and the inmates were like, "Yeah, they add pellets by the pallet." And so one of
oh
my
my
last days in
God.
there, I finally saw the pallets of pellets, and it's called Morton's 4-in-1 Clean and Protect. So it's not only salt pellets to make it into soft water, but it's got 3 other chemicals added to it that protects the pipes. So, inmates be damned, we're protecting the pipes.
Yeah, that can't be healthy. I'm sorry,
No,
but that sounds like heavy duty cleaning products or something, not like something you want to be ingesting. That's
yeah,
disgusting. I don't
yeah.
know that that's even safe for them to be doing that?
So when I got out, I went on the Morton's website and I looked in the documentation, is this safe for human consumption? And I had to go to the bowels of the website to find the documentation on it. And it said may cause diarrhea. I'm like, yeah, you think? Like, this is what I've been
Right.
complaining about since day two. Another issue in there that is that the complaints go unaddressed or they're severely delayed. So I went to medical. You have an intake medical screening when you get in there within a few days of being in. And
Really?
so I already knew I was sick, and I've had cancer before, and I had pelvic radiation about a dozen years ago. So my
Oh,
guts are
wow.
already kind of messed up. So I thought, well, maybe it's not affecting everybody. But the more people I talked to, the more I knew that it wasn't just me who had a bad stomach. And so I
Wow.
went to medical for my screening, and I said, I think the water is bad. Is there a way I can get different water? And he said, no, if it were the water, I'd have a line out the door. It must be the food. And I said, no, because they feed us something different every day, and my symptoms are consistent. And he offered
Right.
no solution. And he just said, experiment with the food. It's a new diet. I guarantee it's the
What?
food. So I give it a couple weeks. I'm sick this whole time, right? And then my inmate friends are like, you need to write an administrative remedy. So you have to fill
Uh-huh.
out this form, bring it to this lady. She will file it. You'll get a response. And you have to say what you want as a remedy too. So you
Mhm.
explain your situation and explain how you want it remedied. So I explained like my physical symptoms. I said, I've already been to medical. They didn't offer any solution. And I want to be given water that doesn't make me sick. I want water
Right.
provided for me that doesn't make me sick. And so I waited 2 weeks to do that. And then I turned it in, and I was supposed to hear within a few days, but I didn't. And so I didn't want to anger the person who I gave it to. So I gave it even more time. They said they didn't get it. So then
Wow.
it was found, then it got, anyway, long story, it eventually got rejected, and it said, go to medical. And I had said, I've already been to medical. Like, that is not a solution. So I had to
No.
do like an elevated complaint that goes to the warden. And so every time
Wow.
you file a complaint, they say in there, if it's not in writing, it didn't happen. And so you not only have to
That's
fill out the
crazy.
complaint, you have to get copies of your complaint. But the copier in rec was down the whole time I was there. And the only copier we did have, we had to buy our own copy card at
What?
commissary, which I had to wait a week to do because you go to commissary once a week. So
Yeah.
that delayed another week. And the whole time I'm sick. And then I got my
Oh
copy
my
card,
god.
and the copier was down. So I went to staff
Oh
and I
my
said,
gosh.
can you make copies of this for me? I need to turn in this, this this form. And they said, no, we don't make copies for inmates. I said, well, the
Oh
copier
my
machine.
gosh.
Anyway, finally found a staff member who made copies for me, and never heard back about it. The whole
Wow.
78 days I was there, I finally realized, just really quickly with the water, I realized that the ice machine, that the inmates who were there for a long time, they would drink melted ice. They wouldn't drink the tap water, and they would tell me,
Really?
yeah. And so I noticed that the back of our ice machine, which went down like 3 times when I was in there, it would just
Wow.
break, and then we would have to go to different units to get our ice and bring it over on a cart. Anyway, the whole place was a disaster. And so so I noticed that on the back side of the wall to the ice machine was the hose that we watered the outdoor plants with. And I know that you can't water plants with soft water, it kills them. So I eventually realized, like, okay, this is a different water source for the ice machine. So once I only drank the melted ice and didn't drink any tap water, then within a few days, my stomach had majorly cleared up.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's so
Uh,
crazy.
yeah. Yeah, it was a lot like living inside the DMV, where most of the people hate their job and they don't have answers, so they just make things up. And
Right.
and one person's rule is not the next person's rule. It was just a lot of
This sounds difficult to navigate.
non-uniformity. Yes, it
Yeah.
made it very unnecessarily difficult to navigate. Another issue in there was a lack of programming classes. So when you get in, so programming classes are classes that are supposed to be available to inmates in order to help them re-enter society. So toward rehabilitation, it gets you time off of your sentence. So if you're a nonviolent offender and you're not getting written up for things and you're in programming classes, you earn what are called First Step credits. So President Trump's First Step Act gave federal inmates the ability to earn time off of their sentences. So when you go in there, within a couple days, it'll show up on your computer system that you can take, you have these tests to take to matriculate into whatever classes you would be eligible for. So
Okay.
I matriculated in, I was eligible for 2 or 3 classes, but those classes were never offered, ever.
Really?
Ever.
Wow.
And so I went to a staff member who I was supposed to go see about that. And I was told that as long as you're on the wait list for the class, you get credit. So I don't know if that was based on complaints
Hmm.
or what, but I was earning credit for classes that weren't even available to me. And I
That's
would have benefited
crazy.
from these classes, I'm sure, as would other
Right.
inmates.
I was gonna say, yeah, I mean, it's a lot better than them just kind of sitting around not doing anything productive. And so to not have that, that just seems very, very sad.
It
And do
was
you think
that.
is this from like a do they just not have enough staff? Like what is the staffing shortages like? And
I
is that like a
believe it
common experience?
I believe it was based on understaffing. So the one class that I was able to get into was a resume writing class. It was taught by one of my favorite people in the entire universe. She's in there doing life. She's an inmate doing life in there, but she's such a gifted teacher and just such a sweet spirit and such a bright light in there. So she allowed me to go into her class. So it was a 4-week class. We were supposed to meet every Tuesday evening for an hour. And so 2 out of 4 of those classes were canceled because there were not enough staff to oversee us. So everywhere an
Wow.
inmate is, there has to be a staff member to oversee them. And it was based on staffing that I only got 2 hours in 78 days of classes.
Wow. That's
That's a
sad.
huge problem. Yeah.
And
Uh,
like how does that translate to? I mean, there's hundreds of women there. I think there was what 600 when you were there, inmates at the facility. So if you have to have enough guards to be watching them, you have to have it. You that means there should be at least a fair amount of staff there. So like if there's any issues where maybe somebody's having a medical emergency, did you ever see people with like serious medical needs not having their needs met? How did that work?
Absolutely. I saw that a lot. I had 2 friends in there who were suicidal. One of them had beat cancer and then was sent back to prison. And she was having symptoms of a recurrence. So she had a distended belly. She was in a lot of pain. She went to medical. She was told that, we'll do testing. They never did. One time she was told that she was just making it up. So she got very angry, very depressed, and she became suicidal. And she went to psych and said, I am suicidal. I plan to slit my jugular in the cafeteria in front of everybody. And the solution that they gave her is they gave her a coloring book and colored pencils to relieve her stress,
Okay,
which, which
that's
is just
it.
that's it. And at first I didn't believe that because I thought, this is just too outlandish to believe. So, and I felt bad doubting her, but it seemed like that is way too unconstitutional. That can't be happening. Well, a couple weeks later, I had a lady, an inmate, show up at my door, and she was crying. I was across from the phone. She was waiting for the phone, and she knocked on my door. She was crying. So I let her in. I said, "What's going on?" And she was in for crystal meth, and her dad was also a meth addict. And she said, "My dad had a massive heart attack. And I have to call my sister right now and discuss taking him off of life support." And so I asked her if I could pray for her. I got to pray for her and just hold her, while she cried and waited for the phone. And they ended up taking her dad off life support. He passed away a couple days later, and she just became severely depressed. And I saw her with a coloring book a couple weeks later, and I'm like, "Where'd you get the coloring book?" She said, "I was suicidal. I went to psych. They gave me a coloring book." And
That's
I'm
like
like, "Okay,
nuts.
this is the second time I've heard this. Like the first time, I wasn't sure if I believed it, but people came to me twice about this.
That's
So I don't
crazy.
doubt them at all." Another
Yeah.
big issue with psych services, um, and and there was a psychiatrist in there who I know had a good heart for us and was trying to make changes. And when she spoke about us, you could feel her heart for us. But I think it was a staffing issue. So another major problem with psych services is people who would be transferred into Dublin, they would have been on psych meds. So sometimes antipsychotics, a lot of times antidepressants, uh, anti-anxiety medication, which you need to titrate down off of. And when they would get to Dublin, they wouldn't get their prescription re-upped right away. And so they would just cold turkey off hardcore psych meds,
Oh
which
my
threw them
goodness.
into just absolute mental hell, physiological mental hell,
Right.
because they weren't able to get a re-up on their psych meds. I don't understand how that's constitutional or humane at all. That was really rough to watch. Couple buddies of mine in there, they both had PTSD very badly. One was abused by her husband physically, mentally, emotionally. Another one was in foster care and had just a horrific upbringing and a lot of anxiety and depression. And they both went to medical and requested psych meds to deal with their mental anguish they were going through, and they just didn't hear back. So it was about 3 weeks after I got there, they went to medical, and it took a couple weeks for them even to get acknowledged that they would have an appointment. And then by the time I left a couple months later, they still didn't have psych meds that they had
Wow.
requested 2 months earlier. Yeah, and it's not like when you go to medical, you can't just like walk over and go to the doctor, or you can't just make
Right.
an appointment. What you have to do is, even if you feel like you're on death's door, you have to get up very early. You have to show up at 6:30 in the morning in line outside, rain or shine, and put your name in to be seen by medical. Um,
Wow.
yeah, and
What
you
do
can't get sick on a
women do?
weekend.
Like, if something right, like, if something happens where they get sick and then the medical people aren't available, or if you get a headache or something, what do you do? If you have a headache, like, you need something immediate. It's not like you could just wait until the next morning at 6 o'clock. That's not really helpful.
Yeah, if you have a headache, you just go cell to cell and you ask somebody for Advil. Like
Wow,
medical doesn't
okay.
care. We relied on each other a lot in there. Inmates were very kind to each other. We supplied each other with items. I was given a lot of things when I got in there: shampoo, toothbrush, toothpaste, body wash, some clothing, some shoes. The inmates help each other in there. which was really nice to see. The dental, one more thing about medical is on weekends, medical's not open. So, and I believe if I remember correctly, it wasn't open on Tuesdays, but I'm not quite sure about that.
Wow.
There was also no dentist on staff. So you've got hundreds of women, many of whom have meth mouth, for lack of a better
Yeah,
term. So,
right. Well,
so
or they have like enhanced needs that
right,
other right.
right. So one of the friends I worked with at the chapel, she had a tooth abscess and would often miss work because of it, because she would have to drain her tooth abscess
Oh
by
my
herself, and
God.
it would make her
Oh,
throw up from the
oh, that
pain.
sounds horrible.
It
That's
was really
awful.
bad. Yeah. There, the water. Okay, I did the water. So the mail was often very delayed. I had mail that never got to me. I never
Mhm.
got any mail after December 5th that was postmarked after December 5th, even though I didn't get out
Right.
till January 2nd. I was told I would be given that when I checked out, but I never was. A lot of
Wow.
people's mail was just delayed. The mail pickup was not, it's supposed to be every day, Monday through Friday, and they didn't pick it up every day.
Of
There
course.
was black mold and asbestos in there. It wasn't just the inmates who complained about it. It was also the staff.
Well,
Um,
yeah, because they have to work there too. I mean, it just seems like a horrible experience overall for not just the inmates, but for the staff as well.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
right. So, and that probably makes things worse for everybody because
yeah,
nobody's happy. Everyone's miserable. It sounds like there's not a whole lot of accountability, and that it's not like it doesn't seem as if there's like a strong chain of command where, like you said, one person might have one rules, another person might tell you something else, and it's just sort of on the whim of whatever officer is there that day, whatever kind of mood they're in that day. I want you to talk about too the issue of rampant drug use inside these prisons because that also probably contributes to the issues with the inmates and the prison guards.
yeah. The amount of drug use in there was shocking to me. I used to do drugs as a teenager before I was a Christian. So I've been clean for 36 years, but up until I was 19, I did a lot of drugs. So this wasn't my first time being around drugs, which is good because it would have been more horrifying, I'm sure, if I had not
Right.
seen people, on drugs before or had not been myself. Um, so the primary drug in there, uh, the one that was most widespread, it was called K2. And from what I understand, I might be incorrect on this, but I believe it's a synthetic form of marijuana. One of the side effects of it is it makes inmates have seizures.
Oh
Uh,
my God.
so so that's called, the inmates call it flopping out. So FLOPPING, because you're flopping, your body is flopping around
That's
when you're having a
scary.
seizure. It
Good
was super
Lord.
scary. So I saw three people who had overdosed in there. Two of them I saw uh, being wheeled across the prison yard. One of them was bright yellow. They were wheeling them out in wheelchairs. And another one, my friend and I, this is a hard story. My friend and I watched somebody overdose from her cell. This woman was out on the prison yard on the track, and she was flopping out. She was having seizures, and she was surrounded. By the time we started watching, she was surrounded by guards, and I believe there was a lieutenant out there as well.
Wow.
And they didn't have a stretcher or anything. They had a wheelchair. And so what they would do is wait. So she's flopping it. She's having a
Oh my
seizure on the
God.
track, right? On this gravel track. And then when she would stop seizing, they would try to put her into the wheelchair to wheel her off of the track, to go to medical or whatever. And so they would wheel her a few feet, and her body would go stiff again, and she'd start seizing again and flop out of the wheelchair. And
Oh my
then they would
God.
wait, and then they would put her back in. And this went on repeatedly. We watched this for probably 20 to 30 minutes, that this happened to this poor lady. And it was, so I have three brothers. Two of them have overdosed and died from drugs.
Oh,
Um,
no.
and so it was particularly rough for me to watch somebody overdosing. So yeah, that was actually a lot to process. And you know, after I got out, I still, that's one of the hard things for me. But yeah, like that should not happen. They finally ended up bringing out a stretcher, and they strapped her down. They strapped her legs and her arms and her forehead down, so that when she seized, she wouldn't flop out of the
Oh my
stretcher. And
God.
they wheeled her away. But yeah, the drugs in there. So the whole time that I've been clean for 36 years, in that whole time combined, I have not seen the amount of drugs I saw in prison in 78 days, nor have I been offered the amount of drugs that I was offered in there in those
Wow.
78 days. And
That's
it wasn't that the inmates were very trying to hide it very well. So in my unit, so each unit, it's shaped like a horseshoe. So you have an upstairs and a downstairs with cells in a horseshoe. And then you have on the bottom floor, there's like a center area where people hang out. Well, if I walked from one side of my unit to the other, at the other side, there was a back room, and it had a little bit of exercise equipment. There were 3 pieces of exercise equipment and a mat. And I would go in there, especially Friday and Saturday evenings, and I would go work out. And when I would walk just from one side of my unit to the other, I could smell 2 or 3 cells where people were smoking K2 in it. And I thought, if I can smell this, surely the guard can smell this. You know, we have an officer on staff in every unit all of the time. Like why aren't they stopping it? And I didn't want to ask inmates, and I just kept wondering, like, why don't they stop it? Because there were a lot of women in there like me who didn't do drugs, and it was really not cool to be locked in a box with inmates who were high out of their minds.
right. I would also
You
imagine too that like if the whole point, if a lot of women are in there for nonviolent drug offenses, putting them in there with a bunch of other people using drugs sort of defeats the whole purpose of getting them away from drugs or trying to rehabilitate them. It's very difficult to be rehabilitated when you're now locked in a facility with a bunch of people doing things in your face. It makes it hard to resist that for people, I'm sure, who were addicts.
Absolutely. And add that to the no programming. There was supposed to be a class about, it's called RDAP. It's about not doing drugs and gaining skills and bettering yourself so that you have the confidence to say no once you get out.
Right.
Well, okay, don't give us a class and then lock us in a box with drugs. Yeah, smart. A very
Exactly.
unrehabilitated environment. So I had become friends with one of the guards, not friends, but had a good relationship with one of the guards in there. And I asked the guard, why don't they stop the flow of drugs in here? I don't understand why they don't stop the flow of drugs. And the guard first looked at me like, I can't believe you're just asking me that straight out. Like, an inmate's just asking me this. But um, anyway, so the guard said, it's because of Priya. And I looked at the guard, and the guard said, "You don't understand what I mean, do you?" I said, "Well, I understand what PREA is. It's the Prisoner Rape Elimination Act. And that's supposed to, among other things, give inmates the ability to report abuse by staff or guards." Um, and the guard said, "Yeah, but you still don't understand, do you?" And I said, "No." And the guard said, the people who could stop the flow are scared to stop it, because if they stop it, they're scared that they're going to be accused of R.
Right.
I know we can't
So
say words on here. So
so
they're
just
going to be
completely
accused of PREA violations.
right, of something they didn't do, something highly inappropriate.
Right.
Um,
So
right,
that
which
just goes to
is so
show like how deeply flawed the system is, how systemically broken it is. And
right.
I know that, they were going to implement all these changes at Dublin before BOP shut it down abruptly, but I don't understand how something that deep rooted and widespread and dark could actually be changed. I don't understand how you
Yeah,
would change something like that.
that's the problem I have with it. Like, I know from my experience with 2 men in supermax, prisons and then, 3 in federal facilities, that it doesn't sound like it can be reformed. They may be experiencing, their experiences may be different from yours, and certainly they're considered kind of like high profile inmates. So they may get different treatment. But I know you talked about how the prison, they were delaying mail. There is something called the SIS officer. Could you explain what that is for people? And did you have any issues with the SIS officers withholding mail or anything like that?
So before I got in, of course, I didn't know what SIS was. It's Special Investigative Services. I was actually told by, I don't want to out anybody. I was told by a staff member who I went to about my mail. I said, my mail is being severely delayed. My first probably 10 days in there straight, I would get a couple letters a day. It was very nice. And abruptly it stopped on November 15th. I didn't get any mail for weeks. And then I would get a mail dump of 15 or 18 letters in a day. So I went to this staff member and I said, I don't understand what's going on with my mail. Do you have any idea how I can get it to not be delayed? And the staff member told me, oh, I know exactly where your mail is. It's sitting in a bucket in SIS, in Special Investigative Services. And I said, well, like, why? Why? Why is it there? And she said, you must be on some kind of a list to
Exactly.
have your mail gone through again. But that is the only reason I would see that you would be having mail dumps instead of getting a consistent amount,
Right.
of mail. Um, so I actually went to SIS.
Wow.
So you can go. It's called mainline. So when everybody goes to eat, the staff and the some officers like stage themselves on the side of the path, and that's the time that you're able to go and ask your questions. And so I figured out who was the head of SIS, and I went to the head of SIS and I said, I'm having an issue with my mail. I had gotten a 43 letter mail dump one day. And at that point, I
Wow.
was just angry. And I'm like, I'm going to try to get to the bottom of this. This is 43 pieces of mail in one day. The officer had to call me downstairs and give me this giant stack. Like, it was crazy. So, anyway, I
Wow.
brought my 43 pieces of mail and I said, what is this about? Like, what kind of list am I on? Why am I on it? And how do I get off of it? Because I was told by the other staff member, if I'm on a list, they have to tell me I'm on a list. They don't have to tell
Really?
me why I'm on a list, but they have to acknowledge that I am on a list. And I just wanted confirmation from this SIS officer that I am indeed on a list. But the officer said, no, you're not on a list. He said,
Really?
I will investigate this. Come and see me next time I'm out at Mainline. So I did. And he said, I checked. You're not on the list.
That's
But
so bizarre.
yeah,
But you don't know for sure. I mean, I'm sure there's probably no way for you to verify that now.
no.
That's just concerning though, and it does seem to me, I think that, so I know some of the there were some J6ers put in with some of the Whitmer guys in the facilities they're at. There's one young man who was in with Pete Musico for a little bit. He's out now. And so I'm wondering, like, if they have, for whatever reason, like they put those people together, high profile people, or they're sending them to certain facilities. Like they have facilities, I think, that they basically where they're sending political prisoners. Now, I don't know this to be a fact. This is just what my assumption is based on everything I've seen. There is another thing I wanted to ask you about, and that would be the shoe, because I know about this from talking to the Whitmer guys. They experience this at the facilities they're at, where sometimes the entire prison will be put on lockdown because one person did one thing, like where they do this like collective punishment. Did they do that at FCI Dublin also?
They did that all the time, and I was able to look up. I had heard that they weren't allowed to be doing global punishments for individual behaviors, but it was so common. I thought, well, they must be allowed to do this. Well, I was able to look it up. You have an intranet on there. You can't go on the internet, but you can search legal issues, prison issues, things like that. And it says specifically they're not supposed to do global punishment for individual behaviors. But what happened was at night, especially on the prison yard, people would be doing drugs or selling drugs or getting in fights or things like that. It certainly wasn't all of us, but within a couple weeks of my being there, they shut the prison yard down at night. And so we were never allowed to go back out there after dinner. And dinner is at 4:30. So 4:30 until bedtime, you got nothing to do. I was able to keep myself occupied. But anyway, so another thing is that where the shoe is. So shoe is the special housing unit where you are sent if you get into bad trouble. It's essentially solitary confinement. It's its own self-contained building. And where it is situated at Dublin is right over the fence from the track that you can walk on the prison yard. And the prison track is filled with small rocks. And so the inmates, if their girlfriend or their good friend or whatever had been thrown into the shoe, they would take rocks and throw them at the shoe and like yell over, through the fence to their friends in the shoe. And every time that happened, the guards were inside the rec building, and they had monitors. They could see who exactly was doing it. They could have just punished that person for doing that and banned them from rec or given them a consequence of some sort, but that's not what they did. Every time somebody got caught throwing rocks or yelling at the shoe, they shut down the whole rec field, the whole prison for all of us, for hundreds of us. That's where all your exercise equipment is, your weights, your other exercise equipment. That's where your walking path is. That's the only place there are tables where you're allowed to sit and write. That's the only place I felt somewhat free. And just because one person did that violation, they would shut down rec for the rest of the day. And they're not supposed to do that. And I can't even count how many times the rec got shut down.
Wow. Yeah, that sounds awful. And I don't think that they're allowed to do stuff like that, but that doesn't mean that they're not going to. I get the feeling that they kind of do whatever they want. I wanted to ask you also about how the commissary worked, the kinds of food that is available to people, not just the prison food, but like the commissary items that are supposed to be like you're allowed to buy a couple things. What is it that you actually have access to? Like, is there any kind of healthy foods at all, or is it all like very processed, questionable food?
The commissary, so they give you a sheet once a week. You fill out on your sheet what you'd like to order. They get your order ready for you before you show up at commissary. Then they take that money off of your books when they give you your items. So that's the way globally commissary works. The items in there that were available were out of the food items. That's also where you buy your shampoo, conditioner, body wash, things like that. But out of the food items, I would say 95% of it was either filled with sugar or filled with salt and highly processed. There were a couple of items, a handful of items. They actually had their own little section on the commissary sheet. Like, I forget what it was called, like healthy items or something like that. And you could buy like a small pack of trail mix or a small pack of almonds. The small pack of almonds cost $4.95.
Oh my
But
God.
and when I was in there, I was an orderly at the chapel, and I scrubbed toilets and mopped floors and dusted and things like that. And I made 24.5 cents an hour.
Yeah.
Thankfully, I had people on the outside putting money onto my books for me, but a lot of the women don't have that. They only
Right.
have the money that they're making from their prison job,
Which
which
is
is
slave labor.
like a horrible.
Pennies.
Yes, yes.
Pennies per hour, which is just they shouldn't be allowed to do that. That should
I
also be
agree.
unconstitutional because they're just using these people to perform this like free labor for them, which creates a very disturbing incentive to keep people incarcerated and to keep people coming back in there. And so we have to wrap up here. There's so much more I want to ask you about that I could probably talk to you about. I want to close off by asking you something I think is very important, and I don't think we touched on it yet, which is, the prison is known as the R Club. Um, I wanted to ask you, did anything like that ever happen to you while you were there? Did you ever experience anything like that? Or did you know any other women there who had been victims?
Thankfully, nothing like that happened to me. I did know two inmates that it did happen to. I also knew I was quite good friends with one of the inmates who had been badly retaliated against for reporting. Um, it was supposed to be an anonymous report. It was not anonymous. It got around to all the staff, all the guards. So all the staff and guards at the facility knew that she had reported it, and they made her life hard for it. And thankfully she's
Insane.
part of a class action lawsuit. So no, it wasn't like inmates were getting AR'd every day. And it wasn't like everybody was, um, but it's still such a huge problem because when you're an inmate in there, you don't have any power. Like, all the guards have control over what you eat, when you sleep, where you're allowed to go, when you're allowed to go there. They have the power to lock you down, write you up, get you more time on your sentence, throw you into solitary confinement. So some of the victims had actual relationships with staff and guards, right? But these are non-consensual relationships.
Exactly.
Even if the women were uh uh there can never be a truly consensual relationship with that imbalance of power, right?
Exactly. And it's just wholly inappropriate and violates
Absolutely.
their rules. They're not supposed to engage in that kind of misconduct.
No, it's
But they
illegal.
do. Right. And it seemed to be very common, not just at FCI Dublin, but at other facilities as well. And I would say that this is probably a lot more common than people know, because it probably goes unreported because of the issue you just talked about. The potential for being retaliated against, which most victims don't want, why add more suffering to themselves? They probably don't report it out of fear that they're going to be retaliated against. And I'd also say that it's not something that just happens to women either. This happens to men as well. And it's even harder for men to report that. They report it less. So we probably don't actually know what the real statistics are, but I think it's probably more common, and it happens in all of these prisons. It is not exclusive to female prisons. I will say that.
Yeah. And also keep in mind that 95% of these women have been abused in their past already.
Right. Exactly. So they kind of make perfect victims in a way, because they've been victimized their whole lives.
Yeah.
And it's easier to groom somebody who has already been groomed.
Yep.
Yeah, which is tragic. Okay, well, I appreciate you coming on and spending an entire hour with me. I know I told you it would probably just be an hour, but I could still talk to you for 3, 4 more hours. I want to hear more stories from you. So I would love to have you back on again if that's something you're interested in. And I'm sure everybody else would like to hear more from you also, because I think that for a lot of people, they know that what's happening in these prisons is bad, but I don't think people understand how bad it is. Not just how bad it is, but they don't understand that there's no recourse for the inmates, because there's no actual oversight of the BOP. Supposedly the Inspector General at the Department of Justice is supposed to be overseeing, reforms at the BOP, but it doesn't really seem like any actual changes are occurring. And it just seems to me that nobody really cares about inmates, because for whatever reason, they perceive that these people deserve to be there. And I think there's an ignorance about what it's actually like to be inside. And I think that people benefit from hearing from somebody who experienced it. So I'd love to have you back on. And let people know where they can find you, where they can follow you. I know you want to continue to speak out for these women and be a voice for them. Where can people find you so they can continue to follow you?
I'm on X and Telegram at Danean here too. So it's DANEANHERE and the number 2. So that's Telegram and X. I'm on Truth Social, just at Danean here. So DANEANHERE.
Okay, and I will I'll link your X in the video description.
Okay.
All right. Thank you. I appreciate it.
I really appreciate this opportunity, and just in closing, I want to encourage people who will be sent to prison. I came out better and stronger, and I was at FCI Dublin. So if I can come out of there better and stronger, you can too.
I love that. I think that's a good positive message to leave things on. Thank you so much again for coming on, for sharing your story, and for being a voice for these women who don't have anybody. Like you said, some of these women are going to be incarcerated for life. They may not be at FCI Dublin now that the facility has been completely shut down to, again, avoid more oversight, but they're sent to other facilities now, probably farther away from their families. Many of these women are still suffering, and they have no way to get their stories out to the general public. So, it's very important to have people like yourself who were in there that are able to be a voice for these people and speak up for them and share their stories. So
thank you so much for the platform. I really appreciate you and all you do for the people whose voices are muted. I appreciate you so much.
Oh, thank you. All right.